Technically illiterate. Well, good afternoon. My name is Jane Artess, and I'm one of the NICEC Fellows. And it's my great privilege this afternoon to introduce two colleagues of mine who are very esteemed colleagues, as you'll have seen from their biographies. And they're going to treat us to a presentation, sort of two-handed presentation this afternoon, focusing on notions of decent work. And they're going to draw on their research, and they're going to draw on lots of practical examples, and I hopefully get you engaged in some conversation as well. I've known these two guys for quite a long time, particularly one of them, this one, in fact, Fiona, who I have to admit was my student many years ago, and she did a diploma in career guidance, and I've watched her career with great interest, and couldn't be more proud to see what she's doing now with her colleague Eileen. So I think you're in for a treat. Enjoy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jane, and thank you very much. Jane set me on a path of careers work and research work, so very big thanks to Jane. So my name is Fiona Christie. I'm a senior lecturer at Manchester Metropolitan University, attached to the Decent Work and Productivity Research Centre. I'm also a careers professional by background. So I was a careers professional for about 20 years before I switched into academia, so very much part of who I am. And I'm with my colleague Eileen here. Eileen, do you want to come to the microphone and just introduce yourself so that people online can hear us both?
Hi, I'm Eileen Cunningham. I'm a lecturer in business psychology, but my background is occupational psychology and careers advice as well. So I'm so happy here today.
Okay. Thank you very much. So today, Eileen and I, what we're going to cover is a few things, really. I've put the aims on the slide. So firstly, we're going to outline some theoretical ideas that have been useful to us in the development of a decent work-informed approach to career learning. We're going to share some recent research about young people in precarious work that I've done, which has informed my approach, but Eileen's also going to contribute about some work that she's in the process of doing around students who work. So there's some research there. And then we're going to move on to share some insights about a current project that we're doing with the Greater Manchester Good Employment Charter team to develop a resource about good work for students, and also highlight and introduce a teaching resource that's been created to use alongside the student and graduate publication. So in those aims, I feel like the aims do capture who we are, really, because we are pracademics, really. We come from practice. So in our workshop, and we're delighted to have 75 minutes here, we wanted to highlight things that practitioners and educators could use, but also be informed by some theory and some research. So we're going to take you on a journey through this session, and hope it does thread well. Eileen and I do quite a lot of work with each other, doing teaching and research at Manchester Met, so we work quite a lot together, and so it's great to be here together today. So I don't intend to say a lot about this slide, but just to, sort of say that we are practice-oriented in how we approach our research and our academic lives. So we call ourselves pracademics, which is an official title, I believe, and there have been books and articles written about pracademics. We are also editors of the Career Guidance for Social Justice blog. So we're very committed to that kind of social justice approach to career guidance, practice and research. We are also actively teaching career and employability to our students. So, and we do try to experiment with a critical graduate employability lens in our teaching with students, in terms of trying to introduce some kind of criticality and theory into the classes that we do around skills and professional practice at the university. And also just to add that for both of us, we both did PhDs, having been in practice, and we've drawn upon different lenses in our PhDs, which I think informs who we are. So I very much, in my PhD, drew upon an anthropological lens, looking at culture and how that affected people in terms of work and their approach. And Eileen drew upon phenomenology and the focus on lived experience in her PhD about students and graduates. So just to sort of share a little bit about our influences which shape what we're doing today. So the agenda, just to sort of let you know that we've planned 75 minutes approximately. There's an element of kind of icebreaker and activities along the way, and also some sort of short inputs where we'll go through some slides. So it's a bit of a slightly unusual setting today in terms of doing it online with a smaller group, a small group in the room. So we can kind of pivot as we go. So, and certainly we think we'll finish early, so there should be some time for questions. But Eileen and I are both here for both days, so you can always pick up on some of what we say separately from the session here today. So that's the agenda. So I'm going to pass over to Eileen just for a short icebreaker.
So the picture on the right is where I had my first job. This is a picture from Google. It still looks exactly the same now as it did 40 years ago, where I got paid, I think, £1 an hour, something like that, show my age here. So I worked in a chippy. Fiona worked delivering free newspapers, and we loved work. We wanted to work very, very early. But I'd like to take you back in time now, because a lot of the activities that we're going to do with you are activities that we've developed to use with our students. So I'd like you to think about, what was your first job? Was it good? Was it bad? What was good about it? What was bad about it? And I'd like you to think about it in those two very binary kind of simple terms. Talk to the person next to you. If you're online, then maybe put something in the chat just for a couple of minutes to get us back in the zone of early employment experiences. Just take a couple of minutes to think about that. Okay, just one more minute. Shall I move on now? Okay, thank you for that. Now, can anyone tell me, did anyone have a really good first job? Really great, brilliant. Stick your hand up. No? Anyone have a really bad first job? Or pretty bad? Stick your hand up. Yeah? Okay, so maybe the other experiences were a bit more mixed, and we were slightly leading you into this notion of good and bad, which is obviously quite subjective. So I was sacked from my job at the Chippy after a couple of weeks because I was too shy and a bit slow. And actually, I think that's a pretty fair assessment of me in my adult life as well. So, but I used to have blisters on my hands, so there were lots and lots of bad things about it. And what we think about in terms of good work and bad work, they are subjective. What's good to one person might be not so good to another person. But what we'll talk about is whether, as young people, we have to accept these lower quality jobs as just a rite of passage Is it okay? What does make a good job? What makes a poor job? And how can we help students and young people, and mature students as well, to recognise what's good and not so good about the work? And then what can they do about it if they realise that they are in a not too good job?
Okay, so now I'm going to sort of set the scene really in terms of some of the policy and research that's shaped our approach to this. So if we look at kind of relevant theoretical ideas which come from career development in a very broad way, through the career guidance for social justice pillars that Julian, Sultana and Thompson have developed, there's been a strong notion about aspects of work and career learning that can inform a more social justice approach to work, really. Importantly, in that work, they talk about critical consciousness and building critical consciousness and questioning what is normal around the labour market, around work, and that's something that is very valuable. Similarly, with psychology of working theory that Ryan Duffy and David Bluestein and others have developed, very much developing that notion, again, of critical consciousness and how we can, as educators and career development professionals, support our clients to develop that critical consciousness with the view that if people have that critical consciousness, it will contribute to their ability to have decent work and good work, really. Interestingly, these are some of the ideas. Sometimes how it plays out in practice is a little bit of a question. People are not very clear about how, even though we might all think, yeah, that seems quite a good idea, critical consciousness, it comes from Paulo Freire and education and so on, but how do you actually put those ideas in practice? Especially when often, as career development people, we want to foster optimism and we don't want people to be looking at maybe what might not be so good at work and so on. But there are other ideas as well that I think are very important to consider. DeVos, she's talking after us today about sustainable careers and very much appreciating that careers are a multi-stakeholder project and various partners, whether it's employers, individuals, institutions, wider society, governments, politicians, all contribute to potentially how people may have sustainable careers. And the well-being session, just then the health and sustainable career session that we've just had sort of address some of these issues. Also, there's been some really excellent work that's been more sociologically oriented in terms of careers that's departed from some of the more kind of psychological ideas, which highlight that there are inequalities around who can access work. That can be about how the labour markets can be structured. It's also about maybe how people perceive their horizons for action, which is the term that Hodgkinson uses in his work, and what they're able to do. So these are some ideas which look at career development, that look at the context that we're in and think about how we want to approach practice and research. And then similarly, there's been lots of work around decent work and the concept of decent work, whether it's the ILO from the UN talking about what decent work is and the pillars of decent work and a global aspiration as part of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, whether it's the European Union developing job quality measures. The Taylor Review in the UK has been a really important document that was actually commissioned by Theresa May's government to make recommendations about measures of good work that people still draw upon recently. Until now. And then our colleague, actually, Katie Jones, who Eileen and I work with, she's also written a really good book recently called Idleness, where she talks about the good work movement and how that's it's quite an influential concept and influences maybe how regions and nations are approaching fair work and good work. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later in terms of our own region and the good work movement that's going on in Greater Manchester. And then finally, the CIPD, which is the Chartered Institute of Personal Development, so that's the kind of HR profession. They've also developed their own good work index. They've even got a good work manifesto. So certainly, and actually quite a lot of this is from the grey literature as opposed to the academic literature, lots of parties at international, national, professional level trying to think, how can we make work good? How can we make it decent? also, a lot of that work will say that actually, if you make work good and decent, you also make for better and productive workplaces. So it's good for the economy. It's not just good for the individuals. It's not soft and fluffy. Some tensions about whether we say decent, whether we say good, whether we say fair, and there's a whole load of interesting discussions about the language we use as well, which we can sometimes discuss, we discuss with our students. So what I'm going to do now is ask the Centimeter code here, and so what I want you to do is see if you can scan that code, and I'll see whether it should be. And this is like a little introductory activity that we would give our students about good work. So let me just open it. Oops. Bear with me. I'll find the tab with the quiz so I can open it. Oops, no, that's somewhere else. So present. Okay, oh, people have started already. Brilliant. Okay, so what is the UK minimum wage for over 18s? So people online should also be able to do this quiz, hopefully.
Yes, scan the QR code, then just do mention something.
Yeah. Okay. Next question. What percentage of UK workers are paid at or below the legal minimum wage? Okay. So correct answer 5%. Well done, everybody got that. I should say that these are all, we have a resource pack for educators and careers advisors, which is connected, which uses these questions. And if you're interested, and the links are in the presentation, the sources for this, you can, for those of you who'd like to know what sources are, they're all in the presentation deck, but I'm just not doing that. You can just, at the moment, it's too much to share with everybody. So, but for future reference. Next question, what proportion of UK workers report not receiving a pay slip? Okay, all right, well done, 10%. We deliberately give these sort of quite sort of almost sort of very quite obvious questions in this sort of more introductory task that we would do with our students, because sometimes these are the things people take for granted, but actually it's, you should have a pay slip. But obviously 10% of people don't. So true or false, it is really important to determine the type of contract I'm working under and whether I am an employee or a worker. This is kind of a UK law kind of issue. Maybe for the people who are not UK here, it might be thinking, what's this about? Oops, oh, I didn't mean to do that one. Oh, sorry. Yes, sorry, that was true, the last one. It was really important. I clicked on too quickly. So if my employer doesn't give me anything in writing, there is no employment contract and therefore I don't have any employment rights. So yes, that is actually false. So you do have some rights, even if you've not got a contract. Okay, let's move on to the next one. True or false, I don't have to just accept being told I am self-employed if the way I'm having to work seems like I'm not. There's a bit of a trend of what's called bogus self-employment that we have in the UK, where people are considered to be self-employed, but really there's something about their work where they are working more regularly for somebody, so they really shouldn't really be defined as self-employed. So let's have a, yes, so that's true. So you don't just have to accept it if the way you are having to work seems like you are not. So this one, yes, that was the last one. So we just wanted to show you kind of sort of short activities we do with our students to sort of raise some of these things, really. So I'm just going to come out now from this. Okay. Oops. So that was where we were, slideshow. Yes, this, we're not going to ask you to do this, but this is in the slide deck, but actually there's a really good... Okay, oh, sorry. Thanks, Michael. Thank you. But yes, there is actually another example kind of activity, again, if you're an educator that you would like to be using some of these things. The Good Employment Charter in Greater Manchester developed a quiz about how good is your job. So it's a very short quiz that students and others, graduates and others can do where they answer questions about themselves, and then the quiz will give them suggestions about what they can do if there's any issues that have been come out of the quiz in terms of how they've answered it. So we're not going to do that today, but it's just another example, really good activity that's in our resource pack. Yes, so there's some of the example questions. The questions tend to be around secure work, flexible work, people management, engagement and voice, health and well-being, and equality and diversity. Those are the broad categories that are addressed in that online quiz that you can do outside of today. So, because it's all about thinking, we can talk about good work, but sometimes it's really valuable to actually give people little activities to test their knowledge and to check this. Just to stress as well that something like that is developed for Good Employment Week in Greater Manchester, but it's open to all and would be relevant to people in other locations. So now I'll move on to the research that I did during COVID about young people's experience of precarious work. I was actually really inspired by David Bluestein's book. He wrote a book, The Importance of Work in an Age of Uncertainty, which was actually primarily with older workers, but he was exploring their experience of insecure work in America at the time of his research. It was also qualitative research that he reported upon in that book, and so I sort of was inspired by his work and the research I did. And I published, this is the short report that's been published about that, which summarises some of the key findings and the impact of COVID-19 on young workers in England. So that there's a summary report that's been published about this small piece of work. So the research questions for my project were about what are the consequences of precarious work for young people? How are young people's needs met or not through precarious work? And how do young people resist and make meaning of precarious work? And how did young people's experience of precarity evolve over time during the pandemic? And in a sense, I was interested in people's experience of precarious work, because, you know, precarious work is the opposite of good work. So it's sort of trying to understand how do they make sense of it. And actually, that's very much part of what I've done in my research work, that over time, I've worked in a university, and very much universities, we want to kind of promote the good possibilities of going to university and the opportunities and the career progression that people have from university. But sometimes I've also felt it's really important to highlight and to recognise maybe the more challenging experiences people have in the work environment, and to sort of recognise that and understand that. So those were my research questions for my project. My methodology it was a small project, so I spoke to only 21 young people, but I spoke to them twice over the period of the pandemic. It was a really interesting period to do it because I interviewed them at a time at two different points. At one point when the economy was shut down in England, but then another point when it just opened up. So it did mean there was a tremendous change for the circumstances of some of the young people. So a small-scale project, what we call qualitative longitudinal research, to kind of capture the young people's stories. So I was guided by her human needs lens. So this is from David Bluestein and Ryan Duffy's work, the Psychology of Working Theory and Psychology of Working framework. I liked the simplicity of this approach, even though there's quite a complex psychological theory goes behind this. But they'd identified these fundamental human needs that people need from work. So the need for survival and power, so associated with work providing the needs to survive and adaptive capacity to control resources. So very much about the material needs that people have through work. Secondly, the need for social connection and contribution. So work is a major context to develop and sustain relationships and how it connects to the wider community and society. And finally, a need for self-determination, the scope for deep engagement in work yielding a sense of autonomy and competence. So they in their work have argued that there are three fundamental needs, and if people can have these needs met, then that contributes to them having decent work or good work. And so these needs influenced how I approached doing my research with young people and the questions I asked them to see, even though they had precarious work, to what extent their needs were being met. So just to sort of summarise some of the, I'm not going to go through the survival and the social connection needs. I'm going to focus on the self-determination needs, because I really did find that young people, they really improvised well in terms of how they navigated precarious work. So that they drew upon significant individual resources and their own personal resources to navigate sort of sometimes what were challenging and disrupted kind of work environments. So certainly that was really kind of notable. And so I've got some quotes on the slide here. So one theme here is around critique and resistance. So you can see the quotes here, that sometimes young people could be very, very critical in quite sort of broad terms. So Alexa is here saying, for the jobs that already exist to be less awful, to be more regulated in how you treat staff. I can't see it happening because I could get on my soapbox about the government and business and how they keep their costs low. So very much sort of kind of that sort of, high level criticism of the labour market. But in contrast, there'll be some people I interviewed who actually are much more individualistic. I've weathered the storm quite well. I've had so many jobs that I can always manage to find something new. I struggle to understand people that say there's nothing out there. So sometimes that, what I would describe as a sort of neoliberal social imaginary, that really, I'm all right, I've managed to find a job. It's not been brilliant, but I've sort of powered on, really. So different ways of manifesting critique and resistance. And then secondly, another theme was around control and optimism. So diverse quotes here, which kind of represent some of the themes around how much control people felt they had and how optimistic they were. So the first quote there from Nina, who's a student worker, very much sort of considering that her precarious work that in a bar, it was very much something, a rite of passage. It wasn't good, but she hoped that her future career would be better. The second quote there is from Sherelle, who's much more negative, much more despondent about her work environment, and actually sort of describing how really because of her poor income, she's on universal credit, casual 0 hours work, that she was struggling to put food on the table. And finally, the last quote, which is from another young woman who'd been doing sort of casual work as in care work, and actually that ambivalent positivity of saying, yes, it was an amazing job. You don't realise how hard it is. I was literally crying in my breaks. My feet were hurting so hard, but it was all just so worth it. So sometimes that positivity, which is ambivalent, really. There certainly was a theme for young people of optimism and something about youth that were less sceptical about the challenges they might face than maybe older people. And then finally, career identity and choice. That there's some quotes here which reflect different presentations of that, which were interesting. So Simone is a musician, so obviously talking about how work has been stopped during the COVID pandemic and how it almost presents an existential threat to her. Secondly, there's Tom, who's a graduate of environmental science, has not been able to get a job in environmental science, worried about what the implications of that for the future. And finally, Sherelle again, who was my most sort of pessimistic sort of participant, very much sort of rejecting work and saying, well, actually, it's all, this precarious work is really problematic. Actually, I'm anti-work. I'm really going to kind of step back from actually even aspiring to have kind of good work, really. So, but just to sort of capture some of the differences there in terms of how young people almost claim some self-determination in terms of satisfying those needs. So in some ways, tremendous improvisation, but also, you know, some problems around this. So some conclusions around this project were some things here, and, you know, around temporal uncertainty, how things change, mental health, work identity. But in bold, I put that they had really strong individual resources, quite able to sort of criticise what was going on, but actually very limited awareness of the collective nature of work, of unfair or fair employment practices, and sort of that was a gap really in terms of what they said. So actually this has sort of led us onto some of the work that we've done to sort of develop resources to help educate young people about this. So I'm going to hand over to Eileen now, who's going to talk a little bit about some of her research.
So we are planning to have time for questions at the end, but any sort of imminent, urgent comments or questions or anything from the online chat, or should we just do it all at the end? Okay. So I was wondering, how many of you work in universities or colleges with students? Just stick your hand up. Okay, that's great. If you don't, perhaps you have children or nephews and nieces who are at university, or perhaps you remember being at university. So Fiona's talked about young people in general. We're going to make it a little bit more specific now to students, which is the group that we currently work with. However, I think that whatever setting you work in, hopefully some of the things that we're talking about are, to use Kathy's word, resonance. They relate to people at all different life stages, all different ages, and all different kind of careers. So hopefully you might find something useful. And we're going to talk, I'm going to mention very briefly my research, and then we're going to go on to talk about resources that we've created with our combined authority, which we really want you to share. We want you to adapt to your situations, and we want you to let us know. So that's what else we've got planned for the rest of the workshop. So if you do work with students, or if you know any students, you will know that there's quite, I'm not going to be dramatic and call it a crisis, but there are lots of things going on in higher education at the moment. There's this wider political context, you know, the government always criticising low value degrees, there's tuition fees, there's lots of concerns about the social experiences of students, loneliness, lack of engagement. As a lecturer, it's sad to see empty classrooms. I could take that personally, but I believe it's not just me. There are lots of mental health issues. And one of the issues seems to be that we often talk about students as having a career in the future, when actually the reality is that most students have a career already. They have a career, they've had a career since maybe the age of 16, and it's alongside and encompassing their studies. So there's a lot of work at the moment looking at these students who are working, who are balancing the study and work at the same time. So there's been quite an interest in it. I'm doing a project at MMU at the moment about this, which builds on my previous research. There's also, looking at I know it's great talking at this time of day because lots of people have talked about the context of these things. So one of the contextual theories that I've drawn upon is Artess' boundaryless career. You know, how do we help people to manage these boundaries in an authentic way? And often quite a powerless and disempowered way. Ritzik and Kissoon have done some brilliant work with hospitality students, arguing that actually precarious work and low quality work socialises young people into this neoliberal society and almost kind of gets them to accept poor quality employment. So how can we get them to sort of recognise and challenge that? And of course, career capitals and employability underpin everything that we do. Fiona mentioned that we teach career development. We teach it at all levels at the university. And we made a pledge when we started working together that we're going to be honest and tell people what it's really like out there for them. So I've put a picture there in case you want to look it up of this quantitative survey by UCLan, and also Kirsty Finn, who used to work with us, is doing this great ESRC project on young women's working lives, including the lives of students. Now, there's always this kind of metaphor of juggling and balancing, and I like this picture from the Times Higher Education because this encompasses both of those things, and that shows how really overwhelming and overpowering it can be for young people and students. So there's a cost of living crisis, funding shortfall, and the precarious labour market is really not taking advantage, that's probably maybe a bit unfair, but it's capitalised on this position of students who need to work. So it's a big industry in Greater Manchester. We're a really big student employer city. But the question is, you know, going back to, I was talking about your first job. Should students accept poor quality work as just a rite of passage? I feel that sometimes student poverty and student working conditions haven't always been taken seriously because it's a temporary condition, it's a voluntary condition, nobody makes them go to university. And so maybe it's not as bad as someone who that's their career forever. However, I've always felt that university students are a very, very a great group to work with, because if we want to make impact in our work, these are the leaders, the managers, the entrepreneurs, the voters of the future, the policymakers. And so if we can educate them and get them to really think about working conditions now, hopefully that'll be beneficial for them now and in the future. So how can we best support them? One of the things that we did within our department is we had like a bit of an interdisciplinary approach. We worked with social policy researchers, industrial relations researchers, and we wrote this article, which I think the link might be in the slides, but we can share with you, or you can just Google it, for the Institute of Employability Professionals. And we came up with these notions of psychosocial literacy and legal literacy, because there's a lot being talked about in terms of embedding decent work into career development. And we'd suggest that career professionals, if we can develop these literacies of understanding employment rights and helping young people to understand employment rights, such as the things in the quiz before that Fiona was talking about, and also psychosocial literacy. I have to admit, we came up with this like quite quickly and we're like, oh yeah, that's a good name for it. But this is about understanding the importance of psychosocial aspects of work. So it isn't just about the working times, it isn't just about pay slips, it's about, you know, how people relate to each other, how people connect with each other, have that sense of purpose and resonance. I'm going to keep saying that word all the time now. So it's so much more than what's on a contract. So we felt this, we've articulated it in this article, and we'll possibly go back to it for another time. So anyway, that's all the theory and the research and the rationale behind it. We want to go on to talk now in more practical terms. So what? How do we actually make this happen? So we're very fortunate to live in Greater Manchester. I say that as a Manchester born and bred person. And it's great that Claire this morning talked about the advantages of devolution. So we live in Greater Manchester Combined Authority, and they are very forward-thinking in developing a good employment charter. We've been lucky to work alongside them to operationalise this and to help to build some resources. So I just thought I'd show this picture, particularly for our international audience, although realising that you might not even know where Birmingham is, but here's where we are today. And there's Greater Manchester, the dotted line up above there. So the great thing about devolution is that Greater Manchester Combined Authority has a devolved adult skills budget. They've also been able to have some autonomy in setting up an apprenticeship and career service, and a youth guarantee policy, and other things that have been on the news recently. Andy Burnham, particularly our mayor, is very, very positive and very determined that there should be parity of esteem between vocational and academic qualifications. So you may have heard him launch the MBAC, the Manchester Baccalaureate. Now, Manchester is actually really good at retaining graduates. We recruit a lot, we attract a lot of students to the area, and we actually do manage to keep them more than many other cities do. But still, we can't be complacent about it. We want to be able to retain skilled graduates. So the Good Employment Charter is an initiative, I don't know how long it's been going actually, but it's a voluntary membership and assessment scheme that aims to raise employment standards across Greater Manchester for all organisations, all sectors. So here are the characteristics that they've set out of good employment. So this is what good employment looks like in terms of pay, secure work, people, that should say management, engagement and voice, flexible work, recruitment, and health and well-being. So if you want to either now or later Google GM Good Employment, Greater Manchester Good Employment Charter, and we were really fortunate to be able to work with the charter team, Andy Burnham's team, to put together some resources. The first set of resources was for schools and colleges, helping young people to think about what good employment is. Particularly proud of this slide. We actually did write these words, to be honest. But Andy Burnham's saying, in Greater Manchester, we want to help our university students and graduates to understand what good work is. We want you to be empowered, have high expectations, and challenge employers who do not offer good work. We also want you as future managers and leaders in the city region to know how to create good work. By learning what good employment looks like, you will be in a better position to make informed choices about who you want to work for and how you want to work. So our guide, this is a kind of snapshot of the first page of it. You probably can't see because of this little box at the bottom, but if you just Google GM Good Employment Charter, resources for education, you'll find that guide. As I say, do feel free to use it, feel free to adapt it. Going back to Kissoon and Riddick, they also developed one for...
Just notice the hide thing. You can press...
Oh, all right. Oh, yeah.
Just if you can press hide.
Hide the box.
Ta-da.
Well done. Great teamwork. So there's the link. So we started with the schools and colleges one, and the guide, it explains each of the charter characteristics. And then what we've done is we've converted it into what does this actually mean to you? So it's just kind of questions that students could ask of their employer or of their work, of themselves at work, to help them to recognise what their good or not very good work might be. So there have been some challenges in developing this resource. One of them being every time there's been an election, there's been a pause on everything. So we've been waiting quite a long time for it to be published. So we had the mayoral elections and then obviously something happening on Thursday. Can't quite think what it is. So this is just a little snapshot of part of the resource. Just checking what time it is. Right, okay, fine. So it's questions to ask our employer. We're not saying that they should necessarily ask these at the interview. It's made me think this about, as a careers advisor, often you say, don't talk about money at the interview. But then I was thinking, well, is it unrealistic to expect young people to just take a job and then just accept whatever the terms and conditions are? So maybe we've done this resource as something that we can talk through with the students. It's not necessarily a standalone. And then to think about what if they do realise that a job isn't good, what can they do about it? And then building on that, we've made this resource for practitioners. So this is maybe something that you might be interested in. So there's a presentation deck. At the moment, that's quite boring looking. It's quite blank. So you could use that anyway and just put your own logos on it. That's fine. We're not precious about that. Maybe just acknowledge us, MMU, GM Charter. But also that will be designed all nice and fancy, like that picture over there. So the presentation deck is using some of the activities and some of the information about the Charter. And then there's the quizzes, like the things that we're doing today. There's group activities and also scenarios where you can think about what would you do in this situation, which we're going to do with you very soon. So, Mentimeter time again.
Yes, yeah, okay, so scan that code again. And this code, there are some scenarios which a young person may be facing or a student might be facing, and we want you to consider what advice you would give or what you think they should do. So I'm just going to...
And just while we're seeing that, we've designed some of these in collaboration with students, and we've piloted them with students. Students have come up with some great ideas for scenarios that we just never thought of, based on real life experiences.
Okay.
Oh yeah, sorry. Sorry about that online audience. Yeah, so we've designed these scenarios partly from experience as careers advisors, but also speaking to students, and they've told us some of the situations that they've been in and what they would do.
Okay, is it open? When you've gone to the Mentimeter, is it open?
Yep.
Are the questions there? Brilliant. Let's have a little look.
It says, what is your profession?
Hold on. Bear with me. That's the... Oops. Oops, I didn't mean to do that. Oops. Oops, I didn't mean to do that.
So maybe while you're just patiently waiting, you could Google the Greater Manchester Employment Charter, resources for education, and just download the resources. And in the resource pack, there are links to these slides and scenarios.
So these scenarios, and they have, are you seeing the questions opening for the mentors? So there's questions about what would you do? You're a neurodivergent person, you've been invited to an assessment centre. Brilliant. So just, so that's what we want you to do. So let's just sometimes, it's annoying. Yes, we do, yeah.
Shall I just read out
Yes,
the-
actually, yes. I think that might be a good thing to do. Well, I'll see if I can get them up on the screen. And meanwhile, Eileen, do you want to come here and talk at the microphone and we can get people's thoughts?
So here's a scenario. Talk amongst yourselves. It reminds me of one of those old games like, I can't remember what it's called, Scruples or something like that. So scenario 1, attending an assessment centre. You have dyslexia and have been invited to attend an assessment centre for a graduate role. You are really worried about this. What can you do? Okay, so either think about it, write something down, have a talk to the person next to you. So with this one, when you use this, you could either give options or you could have it as an open discussion. Could you unhide the slides?
Pardon?
If you unhide the slides, we can just share them, can't we?
Okay.
But then you might have to reshare them again. Okay, any thoughts? What would you do? Quick answers. Obviously, we'd have lots of time for discussion if we did this as a session. What would you do? Okay, so if you were to use yeah? Yeah, go, please. Okay, so the Cheryl says she would get them to check out the applicant pack to see if there should be some information for if there's any special needs, any disabilities, any special requirements yet. So the answers we got is contact the HR team and ask them if there's any adaptations, which is similar. Just don't turn up and don't tell them, which that might sound silly, but that is actually what happens sometimes. Or turn up and hope for the best.
So what I've done is I put those, we've got these all on, they're hidden in the slide deck actually. But this would be the scenario example that we would, so we've got 5 of these which we would get students to work on. And that was the example there.
So the second question is, and again, this is based on real experiences. You travel to another city for an interview for a graduate job. You are unsuccessful, and when you ask about interview expenses, you are told that only successful applicants can claim expenses. What do you do? Again, real situation. This was your son, wasn't it? Yeah. So, what would you do? Okay, microphone.
After I'd finished having a small tantrum, well, you'd probably encourage them to look at what information was given to them before they went. So if there was some suggestion that expenses would be paid for anyone, then they could follow up on that. And I would put in a complaint, I think.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Any others? One of our suggestions is take to Glassdoor and write a damning review of the employer's bad practice, which again might happen in reality. Okay, so yeah, great answer. Check beforehand. Might be a tough lesson in life, but just write to them and see if anything can be done. Sometimes it might just be an oversight.
And what we've done in these scenarios, which we've got in the slide deck, we invite the students to say, definitely okay, not ideal, definitely not okay, and we sort of use the sort of scenario examples to sort of get them kind of thinking about the best ways to behave, really. Yeah.
Okay, so again, people online, have a think about this too. Is it shared now?
Yeah, even though I think...
Oh, no, that's right, okay. So, scenario 3. You've signed onto a graduate programme that includes 2 months training before starting with a company. After completion of the training, you decide this role is not for you and you're really unhappy and homesick. You discover there's a clause in the contract which means you have to pay but they're quite tricky as well. And I think sometimes there's a kind of students who have professional parents or parents who are used to these kind of scenarios might be able to advise them. But some of the students that we're working with, the parents don't really understand or know the nuances of the world of work either. And this is something that we were quite shocked when we found out about it. Okay, any suggestions, any answers? What would you do if you were a student, a graduate in that case? Okay.
Speak to my HR contact.
Okay.
See if they can help me with it.
Brilliant. Yeah. Thank you for that. Yeah. And it may be that for graduates, they're just not aware that there is a HR person or what they do, or that it could be negotiable. And also what we're trying to get across here is forms of collective action, you know, speaking to other people and finding out what their experiences are, joining a union, and kind of, you know, how the best way to deal with it. And there isn't always a straightforward answer, is there either? Sometimes you might have to try a couple of different things. Okay, scenario 4. Have we got, is it 5 that we've got?
It's 5 in total, yeah. Michael's unhiding all the scenarios, so you can bring them alive.
Thank goodness for Michael.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so scenario 4, I'll just read it in the meantime. You are neurodivergent and have been successful in securing a graduate role. On starting the role, you met with the HR team and discussed what reasonable adjustments could be made for you and possibilities for funding through government access to work funds for additional support. Oh, here we are, as if by magic. After 6 months, your boss tells you that you will not be kept on as you've not met the probation requirements. None of the ideas discussed with HR on arrival have been acted upon, and you are surprised that you're going to lose your job. What do you do? So here you've got the option where we've come up with some multi-choice answers, and you can use those or you can not use them. You can just use it if it's a general discussion. So anyone would choose 1? 2? Yeah, okay, yeah. 3, HR, or 4, relevant organisation or trade union about options. So, as I said, that it may be that more than one is appropriate, and it may be that people need a bit of a strategy for if that doesn't work, then I'll do that. But I think one of the things that we want to encourage students and graduates to do is to talk to people, to identify allies, to know if there are places that they can look to get more advice about these matters. And most of all, we want to help them to understand what is and isn't acceptable. They don't necessarily have to just put up with being in poor quality employment. Just thinking about time, should we?
Final one?
Yeah, okay.
Final one. So this was unreliable 0 hours work. So you are a student working in 0 hours work, contract hospitality job. Although as a student you are happy to do casual work, you are getting frustrated with your working conditions. It's not uncommon for you to be asked to work with less than 24 hours notice. On occasion you've turned up to do agreed hours to find out you are not needed and therefore won't be paid for those hours. What can you do? So there's some, again, you can see our method that you can we're giving the students sort of 4 possible options that they could choose. And again, all these scenarios are based on real examples that students and family members on occasion have told us about. So, any ideas as to which ones? Hands up, actually. Number 1, decide to leave the job and ignore messages from company asking you to work. Tell your boss that this is poor work practice and you will leave if they don't start to handle 0 hour workers better. Yeah. Talk to your fellow workers about these issues to find out if they share your frustrations. As a group, ask for a meeting with your boss to discuss working arrangements and how they might be better organised for mutual benefit. That'd be the ideal, wouldn't it? Complain to anyone who will listen, but don't do anything about it. Continue with the job. We may laugh, but people do that, don't they? So, but you can see these are the scenarios that are in our slide deck, and we've created these activities that people can adapt. When we asked our students, we had a student intern to create some more scenarios for us, which we've not put in because we don't need too many. But she was actually a bit more radical, I think, in some of her scenarios than we would be in terms of what might happen. So, but yes, so I think that is all we wanted to cover actually today. So, Jane, we've given you a slightly quiet job as chair, but I think it would be okay if people have got any questions for us now. We're sort of coming up to the end of our slot, aren't we?
We are. We've actually got about 10 minutes if anyone would like to make any comments about notions of good or decent work and the kinds of resources that you're developing in Manchester, and if you'd like to get a bit more information. Emma, are you right? I'll rush over as best I can with. There you go.
Thanks, Jane. I just wanted to share a comment from one of our online participants. So Oliver was saying these are such a fantastic resource to put in front of students at an early age. The benefits and importance of different support systems, colleagues, unions, etc., and not just relying on the goodwill of employers. Also, that it's not just an option to be quiet or find something else. They can affect change too, and bad practice should be called out.
Thank you very much. Was that Oliver? Thank you. Okay. And any other questions or comments?
Well done. Oh, another one.
Thank you, Jane. Thanks. This is really helpful, isn't it? And I think really empowering for students to give them some examples of things that come up, because it can be so isolating when something happens, particularly if people are working from home. And I saw that the resource pack includes resources for academics to deliver some content.
Yes.
That seems like a great idea as well, because it gives them more access. But I wondered if there was any. Let me be really honest, when we've created resources like that, the institution where I work, sometimes people say, oh yeah, but I can't do that as well. That's for you guys to do. So how have you found take up of resources like that? And any suggestions about how you get people kind of engaged?
Yeah, well, these are hot off the press. So they were only officially published last week. So we're really pleased. Eileen was saying about when you're working with a community partner, sometimes there are delays to make these things happen. So they've only just come out. Effectively, you'd have to look at the resources, and we've created a slide deck which goes through some theoretical things about good work and decent work. We've created activities, and in the online guide, there are various kind of downloadable tabs to look at what is usable. We would anticipate, for example, we know that we can probably embed this in our units, because within our units, we try to include some content which is about more critical approaches to employability. So we would be able to, because we run academic units, we can embed it in our units. We think that this sort of resource, it could be used by careers advisors, careers consultants. They could maybe create a new workshop possibly as part of their workshop program, everything you need to know about good work, or, you might have to think about a snappy title for it. So careers advisors could adapt the resource. Please, reference our source, acknowledge the source, but
and tell us how it goes if you do.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, no,
So I think we've created it to be used potentially by academics,
yeah,
but also as kind of careers advisors in the more optional workshop programs that they run.
Yeah, fantastic. And maybe as part of digital resources as well, students
Yes.
might kind of self-serve.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. I mean, the core guide, the screenshot from the front cover is there. It's got the fundamental definitions of good work, questions that students can be asking themselves. So that could be linked, if you think that you'd like to, on your website or your resources, you want to include something about it, it's quite an accessible way. We tried it out with our, we've showed it to a few students and interns and people to say, is this useful? And they've broadly been very positive about it. Okay.
Thank you.
Any more questions? Comments?
I think I saw that you mentioned schools on one of the slides. Do you think it could be used by schools, adapted by colleges and schools?
Yeah, I'm really glad that you said that because, and there are, at the end of the slide deck, we've got all the references, but there is effectively our university's resources is on an education resources page, which also includes resources for schools and colleges. So in actual fact, the schools and colleges resource, which the charter team developed themselves first, we actually have piggybacked on that. So there exists some stuff for schools and colleges as well. So it's slightly different, but similar.
I think one thing that was on the slide that I forgot to mention was actually when we saw the schools and college one, we were kind of a little bit, because it was very, very kind of a bit neoliberal in its tone, saying, oh, you know, you should work really hard and go above and beyond. And it was very much about, you should do this, you should really impress the employers. And we were kind of thinking, well, we need to make it a little bit more balanced. So it's the same kind of format. So we stuck with the same format. Maybe if we'd come up with it just ourselves, we might have done it slightly differently, but it's part of a suite, I suppose, of resources.
Yeah, and we've also added a little bit in the university's guide in terms of questions. If you're somebody that does not have a regular employer, so the kind of questions you can ask yourself if you're a freelancer or self-employed or run your own business or whatever, questions you can ask yourself as well. So that's an extension, which is a bit different from the schools pack.
Yeah.
So, yeah. But yes, we're grateful for any feedback that, you know, if you go away and have a look at it a little bit more detail.
Yeah, thank you. Just an idea that for students that are going into practicum and internships, this would be a really great resource, especially for their first time. And then my question is, I'm wondering if you have consulted with any employers as you were developing this, and curious to know if the answer is yes, what their feedback might be.
Okay, good question. Well, it's interesting. The Good Employment Charter team, Carol Holford, who has been our partner on this, she runs the Good Employment Charter. She's the head of the Good Employment Charter. And my understanding is that there are hundreds of employers that are effectively members of the Charter. So Carol is very sort of connected into employers. So I have to say, the detail of who it's been run by and everything, in terms of what employers have looked at it, I can't really answer that question. You know, when you sometimes kind of produce a resource and you sort of, you're all the details on it. But I know that Carol, when we worked with her on it from the Charter, she was sort of satisfied that the kind of things that were included would be relevant and would be good employers would be appreciative of, really. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I think one of the challenges of the partnership working is also that we were kind of saying, wouldn't it be great to get employers involved, and wouldn't it be great to have an employer endorsing this and a little case study of a really good employment? And that seems to be one of the things that's actually fallen by the wayside a little bit. But also, as a university, we're working with GMCA on lots of different projects as well. So the Good Employment Week, I'm involved in an EDI consultation with employers at the moment. And actually it's made me think now, maybe that would be a good chance to say, have a look at this, any comments, any kind of feedback on it as well.
And maybe this is phase one and you've got ongoing research, getting employers to think, what are their thoughts around this? So you're building a trilogy around this.
Yeah. It's phase one.
Yeah, we're all excited about the next phases now. I was just thinking, it's just making me think about when we bring alumni back and people share case studies as well, actually asking them. We often ask them to talk about challenges they face, but I think actually asking them to talk about how they have negotiated things with their employer to make things work better for them. You know, I think this idea of expanding the window of tolerance at work and making things work. So thank you for that idea. If we do it, then I'll mention you.
Yeah, and it is interesting just to add as well that, I mean, for example, there's some questions in the guide which relate to if you're going for an interview, will the employer let you know what the questions are before you go? Which may seem quite radical. However, we do know that that is actually really good practice, and it really is helpful to especially neurodivergent students and graduates to have an idea of what the questions might be before. I know, I mean, again, I sort of have got my own little sort of case study of my own son, but he applied for a job and he was actually given the questions before. And I think in actual fact, some people might think, oh, that makes it easier because they can just be coached to what the questions are going to be and things like that. But it's just quite interesting that some of those kind of ideas that really we might think are quite ambitious, but really are best practice potentially. So, but yeah.
Any other comments or questions from our online participants?
Michael, Emma, any more?
Any more online questions? No? Okay. Well, I think we've got to that stage where it's just about 1:45, and probably we should be saying thank you very much for a very stimulating talk. It's interesting when you were talking just particularly about the scenarios, that what came to my mind was the connection with the previous session, how your resource and your thinking, which is driven very much by your research and your review of all the literature, has actually helped you to create a resource that maybe goes some way to help people deal with situations they find themselves in that compromise their mental health. So an interesting other side to the coin, perhaps. So thank you for that.
Yes, and certainly I know I kind of talk about critical consciousness, this concept that comes from academic literature, but talking about being able to recognise good work, talk about employment rights, it's a very tangible way to maybe address that sort of quite nebulous idea about what critical consciousness is, really.
Yes.
Also sort of about trying to encourage students and graduates to be ambitious, and I think this is what we're trying to do, really.
Yes. And to have agency and autonomy over the difficult situations they might find themselves in. So thank you. It's been really stimulating and really interesting, and I hope you'll join me in congratulating on the usual round of applause. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's time for coffee.
Sorry about the Mentimeter, but never mind.